So welcome to this MIPIM Connect, which is going to look at the important topic of building value through social engagement. I'm Susan Freeman. I'm a partner at London law firm Mishcon Reya, and I am a long-standing MIPIM supporter. I think it's fair to say I have attended every MIPIM in Cannes since the event started, and there aren't many of us who can say that. So I'm joined by a fantastic panel today. Savannah de Savary, founder and CEO of Built ID, Félicie Krikler, director of Assael Architecture, and Thomasin, Renshaw, director of development at Grosvenor, Britain and Ireland. So we know the world is facing unprecedented change and uncertainty at the moment, and I keep thinking of the Lenin quote: there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen, and it just seems to be a little bit like that at the moment. But as difficult as it is, all this upheaval provides us with a once-in-a-generation opportunity to do things differently, to reshape real estate, and to change things. So we're going to hear from our panelists, who each have a slightly different perspective on how they're seeing things at the moment and how this COVID crisis is giving an opportunity to change the way we do things. So I think, we're looking at social engagement, which requires developers to engage with the communities that they are building in. And one of the issues we have, I think, is trust. So there was a survey last year, I think it was Grosvenor's survey, which said that 98% of the general public don't trust developers, and another 93% said they didn't much trust local authorities either. So there's definitely a failure of trust, and if we're trying to build social engagement, that's something that we need to get over. So my first question to the panel is, how can the property sector overcome that lack of trust and better engage with communities in the development process? So, Thomasin, I don't know if you want to kick off on that one.
Yes, very happy to. I think one of the key things is actually around developers acknowledging that local people and stakeholders actually have a really big part to play in the sense of understanding how good their input can be to the development process. Often it's seen quite cynically as a sort of hurdle that has to be got through consultation in a kind of broadcast mode. This is what we're doing, tell us if you hate it kind of way. And actually it can't be, it has to be a conversation, because what you do if you engage properly is that you find the local experts. They're the people that know the area, they know what the area needs, but also they know what works and they know what doesn't work. So when you're looking at all sorts of aspects of the scheme, and design is something we're used to engaging with, but actually there's some really important aspects that often they know very well about an area, such as servicing, waste management, those things, because they're the mechanics of how these buildings are going to work, and they can have a huge impact if not managed properly. So I do actually think that developers need to have respect for local people as well. And they actually need to understand that they are real fountains of knowledge, and bringing them in to the development conversation that can actually be incredibly valuable, because fundamentally they're giving you advice. They can be like an additional advisor to your design team. And I think that's incredibly helpful.
So it's about relationship, and in any situation it's how you engage with people and how you treat them. And Félicie, from the architectural design point of view, are you seeing things the same way, and are you seeing opportunities to do things differently as we go through this crisis?
I mean, I completely agree with what Thomasin is saying. I think there are two things to me that seem really important. One of them is to be completely transparent and sort of realistic as well in what you want to sort of consult on, because you can't promise the earth, you can't leave the options so open that actually people say, well, why did you ask me the question? You didn't even take that into account. You kind of have to target really the questions and be, as I say, yes, realistic to what the outcome and how can people really help. I think the point that's really interesting to remember is, for example, if I was going to be designing a house for a private sort of family, I would need to learn how they're living, how they're using the space. And it's completely the same thing. You have to understand the communities that you're working within. You know, if you're working in an estate regeneration projects, you're sometimes going to be re-providing homes for people, and you can't just say, well, I've just made the design decision that this is what I'm going to be doing, here's your new home. And actually there's a lot of opportunities in what you can do in terms of co-design, workshops, things that sort of kind of needs human interaction. And just thinking about the context of now, I suppose that side of things is you know, can be addressed, but will have to be dealt slightly differently.
It's funny, isn't it? Because it seems so obvious if you're, you know, designing a home for somebody that you get their input, because they've got to live in it. But it doesn't always work that way. And Savannah, you are at the sharp end, actually, you know, talking to people, you know, about how they want to engage with developers, and sort of very much looking at how we might do it differently. So are you seeing this lack of trust between the communities, yes, and developers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of developers will say, you know, we have such a bad reputation, the community don't trust us. But I think, you know, the point has been made, which is such a good one, which is the community aren't going to trust you and want to engage with you if you have your say, but actually what they can have their say on has already been decided. You know, if it's a foregone conclusion, what the community can, sorry, I'm having to battle with my dog trying to jump off my lap as I'm speaking. So it's looking rather frantic. It's a constant battle, the beauty of home working. But no, so if it's a foregone conclusion what's going to be built, people will realize that, and they'll feel actually even more disenfranchised and more apathetic than they were to begin with. And what that leaves us with is with a community where 95% feel sort of apathy, and the other 5% feel so sort of resigned to the fact that their only options are either block this or accept it just as it is and how the experts think it should be, that they become a sort of vocal minority who try and block change on principle. And it's a real shame, because there's so many people out there who are receptive to change and want to see, you know, sort of better buildings which deliver new homes and new facilities, and, you know, more sustainable designs. But if we don't give them the opportunity, like it's been said, to engage on things they can tangibly actually influence, then they're not going to have any trust, because if you just say, what do you want to see here? And everyone says, we want to see a swimming pool. And you're like, oh, but the planning actually is, you know, to provide some homes. Sorry. Or even worse, you say, what do you want to see here? They say a swimming pool, and you just say nothing and then go in for planning for the homes. It's no wonder that people won't trust you.
And one of the problems seems to be that there's often a sort of mismatch of expectations. I mean, you've mentioned swimming pool, and you know, you hear about, you know, public meetings where, you know, the local community come along and they've got the shopping list of you know, facilities and amenities that they want, but there's no way that the developer's going to be able to afford to, you know, put all these things in. So I suppose one of the problems is managing those expectations. And do we think that real estate developers are doing enough to actually, you know, make the position clear and to sort of create those engagements with the public? Or, you know, is there such a sort of split that it's really difficult for them to sort of climb back from that? So, Thomasin or Félicie, you
I
were
was just going to say that I've been working, you know, doing a similar sort of job for the last 20 years, and I've really seen a shift, I would say, in the last 4 years, probably. So that's only my own experience as an architect, but I have definitely seen a shift from going from what used to be more of a token, you have to have public consultation, which is pretty much an exhibition, that's about it, to proper engagement and actually, you know, sort of thinking properly about the timing of when is the right time to go and consult properly if you want a real engagement. So I think there's a shift, and it's going in the right direction.
Well, that is encouraging. So Tamsin, are you seeing the same thing?
Absolutely, and I think, but it's a cultural thing. I think that people do need to, that some businesses aren't necessarily consulting in that way, but most are, and I think most are seeing the value in actually building a support base for their schemes. So fundamentally, it's actually good for them, for their program, for their project. But I do think also on a personal basis, one of the things that Savannah just said I thought was very true. You know, people do need to be upfront about what isn't possible. And one of the things that I personally always do when I'm consulting with people is I'm always brave. You always have to be brave enough to say no to people when there are things like the swimming pool that aren't going to happen, and explain the reasons why. And also the thing that I found that when you have that much more open conversation, you say no or you say yes. They know that when you say yes, you mean it. But also that when you say maybe, let's think about that, they also know you are actually going to try and see if you can make it happen. It builds that trust in just being much more honest, rather than, as you referred to, Savannah, sort of, oh, maybe, when actually they're going, well, it's never going to happen. Yeah. You know, you've got to be upfront, because that's how you build trust. And actually, trust we're people, and it's not about, okay, you know, the community in Mayfair, they trust Grosvenor or they don't. It's actually about people, and it's personal, and everybody who is a developer and is out consulting, they have to own their consultation, and they have to be the person fronting it, and they have to talk to people so that people know they're talking to the decision maker as well, and it's not somebody who's, you know, just been put there to talk to them. And that's really important, because they know then they've got a kind of direct line to the people who are shaping the scheme. And when you then have that dialogue about yes, no, or maybe, they know it's actually going to have an outcome.
It's interesting. So I was just going to say, so Tamsin, your sort of main focus is that wonderful South Moulton Street triangle. So really heart of Mayfair, and, you know, the heart of the Grosvenor estate. So you've got, I suppose, quite a lot of commercial you know, businesses, and you've got residents. Is it any easier to engage with the businesses than it is to engage with the you know, with the residential community?
Well, I mean, there's actually a really big residential community around the site. It's a couple of acres in Mayfair, so it's Brook Street, Davy Street, and South Moulton Street. And actually, you'd be surprised, there's a lot of residential on and around that triangle. So the residential community is the most vocal, as you would expect, but the business community is vocal too. We have obviously NWEC and other organisations, and we talk to local businesses and stakeholders. But I think what we generally find, and this isn't a sort of sweeping statement, but generally the residents are more willing to have a conversation at a kind of granular level than businesses. Businesses tend to take a broader view, you know, will this bring more people, which could be good for their business, for example, rather than necessarily see it as a disturbance. But that's not, I mean, we have to be really careful about sweeping statements, because I think, you know, it really does depend on the person and the individual involved and how it might impact them. Clearly, construction disruption is an issue for everyone, for instance, so it has to be discussed early.
Yeah, it's a very good point, because I think sometimes, you know, we, in our enthusiasm for new projects, we overlook the fact that the people that are actually living there are going to have to go through a degree of disruption. And Savannah, sorry, you were going to say something. You've probably forgotten what you were going to say now.
No, I was just going to say I couldn't agree more with what they said, but I think it's worth noting that it's incredibly hard to. It's one thing to say, you know, we want to listen to the community and act on it. It's actually incredibly hard, I think, for people to do. And you know, we actually are very careful who we work with. A lot of people say, "Oh, you must be drowning in work at the moment," and we are, but mostly from our existing clients wanting to do more, because we have a lot of people coming to us saying, you know, "Oh, we now can't engage in person. can we use Give My View? And I have to say that, tech isn't a magic bullet that's going to make a community support you. The only projects we can do are ones where there's stuff that can tangibly influence, because our whole ethos and our whole sort of success and value we add is by building trust between the developer and the community. And so the first thing I sort of say when I speak to a new client, and I remember the first time I told someone, I don't think we can add value, I suggest here's some other tech platforms that don't need to actually have tangible decisions to do what they promise. And their jaws sort of dropped, but it's because I said, what is there in your scheme that you think that can actually be influenced? Is there public realm? Is there a flexible ground floor? And how could it be influenced, your scheme? And it could just be something, it's not just how someone uses it. It's about, its environmental footprint. It's about, is it going to help with social integration? Is it, all of these different questions, like, could the wall be painted by local school kids? They feel a sense of ownership. The key thing for me for, actually building that trust and making something influenceable is that you have to be willing to think from the very start, are there things that I can ask the community to have their say on, which are design thinking led? So number one, are they desirable for the community? And, as Tamsin just said rightly, the community isn't one person. We make all the project team get involved now in a sort of remote workshop when we're first deciding on poll questions. We say, otherwise, this will just be seen as PR fluff. This has to be actually done by the project team, and we put them all into different groups where they have to represent the mindset of one of the local community personas. So that you have the businesses, you have people from the affordable housing, you have the sort of people with their second homes. Let's say if you're doing something in Belgravia, you have all these different people in one place, or the different personas represented to say, are these ideas desirable? Are they going to add social value? But also, are they economically viable? And are they feasible in terms of planning and design? Because if you only give people options where actually, it is feasible to get past planning, because often it's not what people want and they don't understand that's the reason why you're saying no. Or financially, it's also got to make business sense. If you can't intersect your engagement questions on all three of those, pillars as such, you're going to let people down. And I think that's inevitable. So that was sort of my main point, is that I think that it's easy. I've spoken to lots of people that genuinely want to build relationships with communities, but they say, we build on a really small footprint. There's no public realm. It needs to look exactly the same as the last one did. There's no even really any influence in terms of we only have a certain amount of budget for sustainability and we can't do more than the bare minimum. But we really do want to consult. And I'm in that situation. I feel for them, but I also don't have a solution for how they actually have a meaningful dialogue with their community, because you do need to have that vision that Tamsin's described. And actually, I couldn't agree more. When we do, we sort of stand with iPad Pros and we do Grosvenor projects at the consultations. We don't just do it online, but we've printed our own badges that very clearly say that we are Give My View. We are the facilitators, the sort of neutral conduit between them, the community and the decision maker. We don't wear the badges that have Grosvenor written anywhere on them, because you're right, people want to have a direct sort of whether it's in person or online, have a direct contact through to the people that actually do know if it's viable or not what they're asking.
Okay. And one of the things we seem to be seeing through this COVID crisis and the lockdown is a real acceleration of the adoption and acceptance of new technology, where people might have been a little bit reluctant before. Félicie, are you seeing anything? Are you thinking about using any new technology now that you weren't using before?
Well, I think both ways. So on the one hand, as architects, we have to be really good communicators, and that comes through sort of graphic means. I have found that going back to the basics of sketching, and we were talking about it very briefly before, but actually simple drawings and sketching and explaining ideas to show graphically is so important. And to communicate an idea to your design team or to sort of local communities, it's really key. In terms of consultation, we've seen sort of some quite interesting ideas of obviously virtual exhibition rooms, unmanned exhibition rooms, which have been left open for the public to sort of go through it. I think post and posters as well, just having things and being able to actually send it around to people is important. So it's it's the variety, and it's really trying to think of how you can catch people in many different ways and as much as possible.
It's interesting. So some of it is actually back to basics, and actually looking at the way people and communities are reacting to the fact that everybody is in a difficult situation is very positive. And I know one of the things that we talked about a little bit before going on air is what property owners and developers can do, for instance, with space that isn't being used at the moment, and that seems to me to give quite a good opportunity to become part of the community that you're involved in. So are you seeing anything like that, Thomasin? Are you seeing that?
Yeah, I mean, we as landowners have been sort of starting a number of initiatives around using space, and I think we have to also be just aware that we need to go through the right routes of actually kind of offering that space. For example, we have been looking at offering apartments to NHS workers, for instance, but obviously that needs to be offered through the right routes of the NHS Trust. For instance, to ensure it's sort of fairly allocated. So it comes with its own logistical challenges, actually. But I genuinely do think I've seen some, I do think a lot of people really want to help, and we've had quite a few conversations with our tenants who aren't using their space about whether certain servicing spaces could be used and offered up, for instance. And everybody, I think what's been amazing is everybody has been really willing to do that.
Yeah, and quite a lot of the hotels, and I think some of the hotels on the Grosvenor estate are giving their rooms to NHS staff that need it, and I know some of the hotels are actually absorbing people that would normally be on the streets. And Savannah, are you able to use your amazing technology to help with any of this?
That's really, because we're a social impact tech company, that's what gets us out of bed in the morning. So for us, seeing this groundswell of community activation and sort of grassroots initiatives with 2.5 million plus volunteers now is incredible. And I think there's a real sort of need for developers to tap into this and to support them. So not just to say, congratulations, we give you this space for this purpose, sort of here you can have a donation hub, for your excess supplies, but instead to say, what do you want? Do you want a donation hub in this space? Or if actually you prefer somewhere where a lot of key workers can come and just pick up their spare things? Or actually you don't think it's the best use of the space and you'd rather we save up our money and our resources to start thinking about how we can develop this vacant unit as a community space for after lockdown, when there's a potential economic sort of ramifications to deal with, and people are out of jobs and they need space to help for skills retraining, or to have affordable places to work, or to learn new crafts, because the industries and world is changing as a result of this impact. Actually asking the community, and I think it's what Thomasin said at the beginning, which is we forget that they are also experts in their own right, and they know better than we can possibly presume what the needs are of a diverse community. The only way you can find that out is by asking a diverse segment of that community. So yeah, we have a client that recently on the King's Road went to go live with a project that was about their shopping centre they were regenerating, and it had been in the works for ages, and it went live for a few days, and then we said to them, it's doing fine. However, we do feel that it sort of feels a little bit sort of unbalanced with community priorities and preoccupations right now, that we're asking them what sort of entertainment would you want in the shopping centre in the future. So they were incredible, and what they actually did is they adopted a few of these questions. We've put together a whole booklet of questions around engaging communities in a time of crisis, and they actually said, they started off by putting in there, we have vacant units in the shopping centre. Before we redo it, how would you like to use it? You tell us what you would like to use this for if you're part of a community COVID mutual aid group. And the response has been absolutely incredible. So we've done a lot of projects in that area, and comparing the last, I think, 10 or 15 projects with this one, on average, we've had 55% more people engaging on this than we normally do. And let's remember that we normally get thousands of people engaging anyway. So it really is staggering. And it's because, there's so much communities have to give if you just, connect in with them. Yeah, I'm a big believer that in times of crisis is the time when there really is opportunity to try and add social value in a way that you maybe didn't think you could before as a business.
Well, it certainly seems that, you know, this extraordinary time is making people rethink the way they do things. And Félicie, you specialise in the sort of residential and later living and those sort of projects. Are people going to sort of rethink the way they want to live? I mean, will we now be designing people's homes with live workspace so that they really do have the option to work from home?
It's interesting you mentioned that. We, at the very beginning of this, when we all started working from home, we thought we would put out a short survey asking, you know, people about how they feel about working from home. And interestingly enough, you know, like about 25% of people are saying that actually they're working in inadequate conditions, and I have no doubt that it's offering us a really different relationship with our home and understanding our home to what we normally do. I've finally managed to work out how I want to design my extension from spending so long working here and looking at the space and thinking about it, you know. So I do. I mean, we are working. It's extreme sort of home working, I would say. So we'll probably be working more and more from home, but it won't happen in such a way that we are all working from home and we actually can't go out as much. But I think it's really important to me, the main notion out of all of this, more than any design changes, is the importance that your home design can have on your well-being, and the fact that it's something that it's the well-being word. We're hearing this more and more these days, but it's really what it comes down to, that, you know, having access view onto sort of the outside, having natural light, it's not about necessarily size of space, but it's the quality of the space and how it makes us feel. The sort of you know, are you able to have an impact on your environment? Can you open the window? All these sorts of things, I think we'll be thinking about it a lot more.
Interesting, because I think everybody is thinking more about how good design can impact on, you know, well-being and community in a way that they hadn't thought about it before. And Félicie, I think you're involved with the RIBE Social Value Toolkit. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That's correct. So we started thinking with the RIBE research group about more than a year ago. Social value, when architects have to demonstrate how they deliver social value, it's generally through offering apprenticeships through construction period. But we know that that only lasts a short amount of time. And actually, for us, demonstrating social value really has to come through sort of what the design actually delivers and the impact, the positive impact that can have in people's lives, especially when we're talking about housing. You know, we spent like more than sort of almost 90% of our time indoors, so it's really crucial. So the RIBE is going to be launching a social value toolkit at the end of May. And it consists of sort of sets of questionnaires, because we often think, you know, we've been talking all this talk about consultation and the sort of the early stages of how you design and you plan. And quite often we build homes, people move in, and we never look back. And actually it's all going to be about asking questions about the positive impact that the design of their homes is having on their lives. as part of the post-occupancy evaluation stage. And I hope that more and more architects are going to be looking at this and using this in trying to evaluate and try to evolve and change if there are things that can be changed, because I'm sure that not all responses are going to be positive. So it's all about getting better and improving.
Yes. So if I asked each of you, I mean, we talked about, change and different attitudes, and obviously having to rise to the challenge we're all dealing with at the moment. Is there, if one looks ahead over the next sort of year or 2 years, is there any sort of one thing that each of you would like to see change in the way that we develop and create communities and go forward? So Tamsin, any thoughts on that?
I think the key thing is just it does come back to that community engagement piece, that people do feel. I think it's really important that when we build buildings, that we leave the place and the people in a better place than they were before. And I think, you have to, I hope that this trend, as we talked about earlier, of developers really, really listening to their local communities, that becomes the norm, rather than being a sort of a trend, as it were. And it becomes sort of across the whole industry, because bringing it back to where you opened this discussion, which is about the public trust survey that we undertook, we have to be in a better place in a few years' time than the stats that came out of that, because that's just no way that people who are building the future for communities can carry on. It's just not acceptable. So I think that's a really key point for me.
And it's actually interesting, because as the Grosvenor, you've been there for hundreds of years. You're not going anywhere, so you're in a sort of slightly different position than a lot of other developers who can go in, create what they think they should create, and then move on to the next thing. You're there, and you do have to engage with your community on a day-to-day basis, which I think must all be positive. So Savannah, what about you? What change would you like to see?
I'd like to see the same, but I think I'm slightly more skeptical. I think that we've already seen a shift, that it's gone from everyone just openly acknowledging that they think community engagement is just a box to tick a few years ago. And I think we said earlier, in the last 4 years, that has really shifted. I think now we're at a stage where there's very much a difference between the majority of developers who want to be able to say they've genuinely, meaningfully engaged, and the creme de la creme of developers who actually want to meaningfully engage. Because like I said, it's not enough to say, have your say. You have to be willing that once people have had their say, you act on it. And that takes a lot more sort of, I think, early sort of engagement than a lot of people like to do. So I guess what I'd like to see is we've already reached the point where now it's like you said, it's a trend. It's fashionable to say you care what communities think, and the leading developers are absolutely acting on it. I'd like in the next couple of years for it to become more mainstream, that everyone genuinely accepts exactly what Tamsin said earlier and actually thinks it, rather than thinking they should think it, which is communities have genuine value and insight to share into building better places. That actually it's not just that you should engage your community because it's going to help you get planning. You should engage the community because it's going to help you build a better place that creates more social value. And I think absolutely I have confidence that's going to happen, because the rise of ESG as a metric that isn't fluff but is actually something that has an impact on your portfolio performance and who wants to invest in it. I think this plays very nicely alongside that increasingly we'll find people taking it genuinely seriously.
No, that's good. So that's a new standard for developers to aspire to, being part of the creme de la creme. I like that. And Félicie, what change would you like to see?
I think there are 2 words that I'd like to hear more, which would be collaboration and diversity, because I think that it's one thing if you are working for a developer. It's slightly another if you're working, for sort of more public-private partnerships. So having more collaboration of, different kind of actors in the sort of client world, more collaboration of more architects being involved on larger projects, so that we can bounce ideas of each other. And also diversity, because I think the only way to really be trusted is that the people that are actually working on the projects themselves are a healthy representation of the diverse environment that they are working in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, that's all very positive. So I think it's probably a good place for us to finish. So huge thank you to Savannah, Thomasin, and Félicie for focusing on the positives and the innovation and giving us some challenges. And hope to see you all back in Cannes sometime soon. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you very much.